Vivian Crane threw a glass of water in the handyman's face and laughed for her investors. She didn't know he owned the floor she was standing on, or that the document in his truck could unmake her family name. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Calder's Mill, Vermont. The mill smelled of sawdust and cold river stone. Morning light came through the tall windows in long grey bars. Daniel Vance knelt on the maple floor with a sanding block in his hand. He worked the grain slow. He always did. He wore faded flannel and old boots. His hands were rough, scarred at the knuckles. A travel mug of black coffee sat cooling on a sawhorse beside him. He had been there since 5. Then the doors opened, and the cold rushed in with her. Vivian Crane walked the length of the mill like she already owned it. Heels on 100-year-old wood, a camel coat that cost more than Daniel's truck. Behind her came 4 men in dark suits, investors, phones up, recording everything for the launch reel. "This," Vivian said, sweeping a hand, "is the flagship. Crane's first New England location. Rustic, authentic, real." She said real like it was a flavor she had ordered. Daniel kept sanding. She stopped a few feet from him and frowned at the floor. "What is he doing?" The site manager hurried over. "Restoring the original maple, Miss Crane. It's the building's signature feature. He's the best in the pane." It scuffed. She pointed a toe at a faint mark. "There. And there. I'm signing a lease on a luxury concept, and there's a man in pajamas crawling around on my floor." Few investors chuckled. Phones tilted toward Daniel. Daniel looked up. Calm eyes. "Morning," he said. That was all. He went back to the grain. Something about the calm seemed to bother her. People got nervous around Vivian Crane. People apologized. This man just said morning. She picked up the bottled water a handler had set on the sawhorse. She cracked the cap. And then, for the cameras, for the laugh, for the small electric thrill of it, she tipped the glass and threw the water in his face. There. She smiled for the lenses. "Now the floor isn't the only thing that's wet. Maybe it'll get done faster." The investors laughed. One of them clapped. Water ran off Daniel's jaw and down into his collar. He did not flinch. He did not stand. He took a clean rag from his back pocket, wiped his face once, folded the rag, and set his hand back on the block. "Floor will be ready Friday," he said quietly. Whoever ends up signing. Vivian was already walking away, laughing with the suits, and she didn't hear the strange thing buried in it. But the site manager did. He went pale, and he said nothing. When the suits had gone, the site manager came back. He stood over Daniel a moment, working up to something. "Mr. Vance, I'm sorry. I didn't know she—" "It's fine, Tom." "It's not." Tom lowered his voice, though they were alone now. "If she knew. If any of them knew who you—" "They don't." Daniel reached for his cold coffee and drank what was left, "and it stays that way." "We agreed." Tom swallowed and nodded and walked off fast. Why didn't the man react? Any other worker would have shouted, or quit, or begged. Daniel Vance just dried his face and went back to a floor that, by every record in the county, did not belong to Vivian Crane at all. At 3 o'clock, Daniel loaded his tools into an old Ford pickup blue once, mostly faded now, and drove the river road to Calder's Mill Elementary. Nora was waiting on the steps with her backpack hugged to her chest. 7 years old, 2 missing teeth. She ran the moment she saw the truck. "Daddy, I got a star on my reading." "1 star?" He opened the door for her. "I expected 2. There's only 1 per page." She buckled in, very serious about it. He smiled. It changed his whole face. They drove home to a small house at the end of a dirt lane, with a workshop out back bigger than the house itself. Inside the workshop, half-finished furniture stood in clean rows, a child's rocking chair, a dining table of figured walnut, a cradle no one had ordered. The air smelled of walnut oil and wood smoke. Daniel made grilled cheese. Nora practiced her letters at the workbench. Ordinary, quiet, a life built small on purpose. After she'd eaten, Daniel unrolled a set of blueprints across the bench and weighted the corners with 2 chisels and a coffee can of screws. Not the mill plans. Something older. Drawings of a machine, fine pencil lines gone soft with handling, a younger man's careful hand in the margins. He studied them the way other men read letters from home. On the corner of the bench, turned half away, sat a small framed photograph he never quite looked at directly. A woman laughing, sun in her hair. He'd built every shelf in that room. He had never once moved the photo. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face changed, went still and careful. "Vance," he answered. He stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door half shut. "No. Hold the lease. I don't care who's asking." A pause. "Because I want to know who I'm dealing with first." "Yes. Same as always. Nothing moves until I say." He hung up. Through the window, Nora waved. He waved back and he put the phone away like it had never rung at all. Later, when she was asleep, Daniel went out to the truck. Behind the seat sat a locked steel case, scratched and dented from years of being carried and never opened in front of anyone. He turned the small key. Inside lay a thick envelope, yellowed at the edges, and a folded blueprint. On the envelope in faded ink, someone had written a single name. The name was Crane. He looked at it a long moment. Then he closed the case, locked it, and slid it back behind the seat. Whatever it held, he had carried it for years and never used it. Tonight, for the first time, his thumb hovered over the latch a beat too long. The next morning, Vivian's lease fell through. She found out in the worst way, in a glass conference room in front of the same investors, when the leasing agent set down the phone and said words she didn't understand. "The owner won't sign. He's pulling the building off the table." "The owner is a holding company," Vivian said. "I've been dealing with him for 3 months. The holding company manages it, but the actual majority interest has to approve the lease personally, and he's declined. Then I'll meet him. Today, it doesn't take meetings. No one's met him, not even the agents." Silence in the glass room. The investors looked at their phones a little differently now. That was when Marcus arrived. Marcus Crane was Vivian's stepbrother and the company's chief operating officer. Tall, smooth, expensive suit, a smile that arrived before he did. He set a hand on Vivian's shoulder, warm and heavy. "Viv, breathe. We close this lease this week. You heard the agent. The owner. The owner is one man in a small town." Marcus's smile didn't move. "Everyone has a price or a pressure point. Calder's Mill is the entire launch. The reels, the press, the investor timeline. It all hangs on this building. We do not lose this building. Are we clear?" He squeezed her shoulder a touch too hard, then let go. 3 days, he added, lighter now, for the room. "Find me a way to the owner. Charm him. Buy him. I don't care." He smiled at the investors. "Crane always closes." They smiled back. They wanted to believe it. What Vivian didn't know was that Marcus needed the lease far more than she did. For 2 years he had been quietly liquidating Crane assets and papering over the holes with new deals. The flagship lease was the cover story that kept the numbers from screaming. If it collapsed, the holes would show, and someone would start counting. That afternoon, restless, Vivian did something she never did. She drove to Calder's Mill alone, just to look at the building she might lose. The handyman's old Ford was parked outside. She almost turned around. Instead, she went in. He was at the floor again, the maple glowing now, half of it finished and warm as honey. He didn't look up. "Nice work," she said. It surprised her to mean it. "It's a good floor," he said. "Old growth. They don't make this anymore." She stood there, awkward in her own skin. "About yesterday. Don't worry about it. I threw water in your face." "You did?" He finally looked at her. No anger in it, just a kind of patient reading, as if she were a grain he was working out. "You should know the lease isn't going to happen. Not the way you want it." Her stomach dropped. How would a handyman know that? He went back to the floor. Small town, word travels. She drove home rattled. She kept hearing it. Whoever ends up signing. And the flat certainty in his voice. The way a man sounds when he already knows the ending. No one talked to her like that. No one had in years. People told her what she wanted. That was the whole architecture of her life. This man had told her the truth and gone back to his sanding. And that night, deep in the Crane Company archive, hunting the founding patents for anything that might give her leverage on a stubborn owner, she found a name on the oldest and most valuable patent the company held. The kitchen equipment design that had launched the very first Crane restaurant, half a century of growth ago, the patent that had built everything, the inventor of record, was not her father. The name had been struck through. But under the strike, barely legible, she could still read it. D. Vance. She enlarged the scan. Beneath the patent, clipped to the file, was an old internal memo. 3 lines, dated the year the company was founded, signed by her grandfather. Settle quietly. He won't fight it. He's a good man, and his wife is sick. The rest had been redacted, even from the family's own records. Vivian read it 3 times. Then she closed the file and sat in the dark. Vance was not a common name, and there was a man in a flannel shirt 40 minutes north, sanding a floor in the exact building she could not lease, who had told her, calmly, certainly, that the deal would not happen. She told herself it was a coincidence. She did not believe it. The next day she drove back to the mill with questions ready. Daniel wasn't there, but his daughter was, Nora, cross-legged on a drop-cloth, drawing while the truck cooled outside, and her father ran to the hardware store down the road. "Hi," Vivian said, careful, unsure how to talk to a child. "Hi." Nora held up the page. "It's our workshop. That's the cradle Daddy's making. It's not for anybody. He just makes it." Vivian crouched down. Something in the small, honest voice loosened a little of the armor. "Your dad is very good with wood. He's good at everything." Nora went back to coloring. "He's an engineer, but he doesn't do that anymore. Not since Mama." Vivian's throat tightened. "Since your Mama." Nora didn't look up. "He keeps her papers in the truck. The important ones. He says he's keeping them safe for her, for when it's the right time." She frowned at her crayon. "I don't know what time that is." "The papers Daddy keeps for Mama." Before Vivian could ask anything else, the Ford pulled up. Daniel came in fast when he saw her crouched beside his daughter, not angry but a wall going up behind his eyes. "Nora, grab your bag." His gaze found Vivian's. "Help you with something?" "No," she said. "No, your floor's beautiful." And she left, before she said something she couldn't take back. But she was not the only one who had started asking who Daniel Vance really was. That same evening, in a Boston high-rise, Marcus stood at a window with a tumbler in his hand and a private investigator's report open on the desk behind him. He had ordered the dig the moment the lease stalled. Find the owner, find the leverage. The report had come back with far more than a name. The majority owner of the Colders Mill building was a private trust. The trustee was a man named Daniel Vance, former engineer, and cross-referenced against Crane's own founding records. The report flagged a 50-year-old patent dispute that had been quietly buried, a stolen design, an original inventor who had never come forward, an old signed document presumed lost, not destroyed. Marcus read it twice. Then he set the glass down very carefully because his hand was not quite steady. If Vance owned the building, the lease would never close, and Marcus's fraud would surface within weeks. If Vance still held the original patent document, it was worse, far worse. It didn't only threaten the lease, it threatened the legitimacy of the entire Crane empire, every dollar of it, all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to the holes Marcus had spent 2 years hiding. One quiet handyman in Vermont could unmake all of it. Marcus picked up his phone. He did not call Vivian. He called a man whose number was in no company directory, and he said, low and even, "There's a building up in Calder's Mill. There's an old inspection problem. I need to suddenly become very real. And there's a man up there who's about to have a very inconvenient few weeks." A pause. "I want to know everything he keeps in that truck, and I want a reason for him to leave town." He hung up. Outside the window the city lights blurred, and 40 minutes north of a quiet, half-finished floor, a child slept soundly beside a locked steel case, neither of them knowing the whole world was about to come for what was inside it. Daniel Vance had kept the secret for 50 years out of mercy. He was about to learn that mercy has a shelf life, and that the people you spare do not always raise children who deserve it. By Friday, the floor would be finished. By Friday, 2 strangers would come to town asking after a man in faded flannel, and the document he had never used would stop being a thing he carried, and become the only thing that could save a little girl's name. The 2 strangers came Friday, just as the floor was finished. Daniel had laid the last coat of oil at dawn. The maple glowed end to end, 100 years of grain pulled up out of the dark and made warm again. He was wiping his hands when the black SUV rolled into the lot. First man wore a county badge that didn't quite match the lanyard. He carried a clipboard like a weapon. Building inspection. We had a complaint. From who? Daniel asked. Anonymous. The man was already walking the floor, scuffing it with his heel. Structural concerns. Could be a stop-work order. Could be condemned. He smiled without any warmth in it. These old mills, shame to lose one. Be a lot easier on everybody if the owner just let the deal close and walked away. There it was. The pressure, dressed up in a badge. The second man said nothing. He drifted toward the back, toward the supply room where Daniel's gear was stacked, and Daniel watched him go the way you watch a dog you don't trust. You can write what you like, Daniel said evenly. The floors to code. The buildings to code. I have the engineering reports, all of them. He paused. I did the engineering myself. The inspector's smile flickered. That was when Tom came in fast from the lot, phone in hand, face tight. Mr. Vance, there's water in the supply room. Tap's been left running over the new boards, whole stack soaking. The second man came back wiping his hands. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He looked at the inspector for a long moment, and something in his calm made the man take a half step back. Tell whoever sent you, Daniel said, that I've spent 30 years being patient. Tell him patience isn't the same as fear. He nodded at the door. You're done here. They went. The SUV pulled out fast. Tom exhaled. They're not going to stop. No, Daniel agreed. He crouched and pressed his palm flat to the finished floor, checking the water hadn't reached it. It hadn't. They're not. He'd known this day would come from the moment the crane name came north. He just hadn't known it would come for the floor first. Vivian came that afternoon, alone again. No coat that cost a fortune this time, just a sweater, her hair down, and an expression Daniel hadn't seen on her before. I know what you are, she said. Daniel set down his rag. You're the owner, the trust. You blocked my lease. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was searching, and your name is on the founding patent, the one with my family's name built on top of it. She swallowed. I need you to tell me I'm wrong. Daniel was quiet a long time. Come on, he finally said. Not here. He took her to the workshop. She stood in the doorway and forgot for a moment why she'd come. It smelled of walnut oil and wood smoke. Half-finished pieces stood in clean rows. A child's rocking chair. A table of figured walnut. A cradle no one had ordered. He just makes it, Vivian said softly, remembering Nora's words. Some things you make because the work is good, Daniel said, not because anyone's buying. She saw the photograph on the corner of the bench, the laughing woman, sun in her hair. She understood without being told. Nora's mother, she said, Ellen. Daniel's hands went still. She got sick when Nora was 3. We had 2 good years after that, more than the doctors promised. He looked to the cradle. She used to sit right there while I worked. She'd read out loud, said the sound of the sander put the baby to sleep, a small private smile. It still does. Nora can't fall asleep without it. I think she remembers without knowing she remembers. He drew a slow breath. I was an engineer, a good one when I was young. I designed kitchen equipment, a heat exchange system that cut a commercial ranger's fuel cost almost in half. It was going to be the thing I built my life on. What happened to it? A man named Arthur Crane happened to it. Daniel said the name without venom, which somehow made it worse. Your grandfather. We were partners, briefly. I trusted him with the drawings. He filed the patent in his own name and pushed me out. I had a sick wife and a newborn and no money for a fight. He had lawyers. Vivian's stomach turned over. So the first Crane restaurant. Every Crane restaurant. The whole empire runs on equipment built from my design. 50 years of it. Daniel finally looked at her. Your father inherited it clean. Far as he ever knew, the patent was always ours. Then why didn't you fight? Ever? Daniel went to the truck. He came back with the steel case, set it on the bench, and turned the small key. He took out the yellowed envelope marked Crane and laid it open. Inside was the original signed agreement, the real one, the one that proved the design was his, dated and witnessed before Arthur Crane ever filed a thing. and clipped behind it a letter in an old man's failing hand. "Your grandfather wrote me this," Daniel said, 2 weeks before he died 30 years ago. He didn't read it aloud. He let her. Vivian read it twice. It was an apology, a confession. "I took what was yours and I cannot give it back without ruining a family that has done no wrong. I am a coward to ask, but I am asking." "AC," he begged me not to bring it down, Daniel said. "Not for him, for your father who didn't know, for you who weren't even born." He closed the case gently. "Ellen was dying. I had a daughter to raise. I decided I didn't want my life to be a lawsuit, so I kept the proof and I kept quiet, and I let it go." Vivian's eyes were wet. "All these years you could have taken everything." "I never wanted everything." Daniel's voice was low. "I wanted my wife to get well. That wasn't on offer." For a moment neither of them spoke. Outside the river ran. Somewhere a school bus would soon be dropping a 7-year-old at the end of a dirt lane. "Then why surface now?" Vivian asked. "Why blot the lease? Why let me find any of this?" "Because something's wrong with your company," Daniel said. "And it's about to hurt people who don't deserve it. Including you." He set a thin folder beside the case. He had been quiet, but he had not been idle. "I'm an engineer, Vivian. I read systems. For 2 years I've watched Crane sell off assets it should be growing. Properties flipped below value. Suppliers paid late, then bought out. Money moving in circles that only make sense if someone's draining the middle." He tapped the folder. "Your stepbrother needed this lease to close because the lease is the last thing holding the story together. The numbers don't add up. They haven't for a while, and when they finally stop adding up in public, your father's name goes down with the fraud." "Marcus," Vivian breathed. The hand on her shoulder. "Everyone has a pressure point. The inspector with the badge that didn't match. He sent those men today. He's known who I am for a few days now. He's scared. Scared men get loud right before they get caught." Daniel slid the folder toward her. "I didn't assemble this to destroy your family. I assembled it because someone inside it already is. The only question left is who tells the truth first." Vivian looked at the folder. She looked at the cradle no one had ordered, and the photograph of a laughing woman, and the floor she had thrown water across without knowing whose it was. "Me," she said. "I tell it." That week, Marcus felt the floor shifting under him and didn't know why. The inspector's calls stopped being returned. A property he'd quietly listed pulled itself off the market overnight, the trust that owned the mill moving faster than his lawyers could. Twice he called Vivian and got her voicemail. He told himself she was sulking. He told himself a handyman in Vermont was a handyman in Vermont. He poured a drink and looked at the city and did not sleep well, and he could not have said what he was afraid of, only that the fear had a shape now, and the shape was a man in a flannel shirt who would not be bought. The Crane board met that next Thursday in Boston. Marcus ran the room the way he always had, easy, warm, certain. He had a slide deck about the Calder's Mill flagship, about momentum, about a small delay he was personally resolving. He smiled at the directors, he smiled at Vivian. "Before we vote on the lease extension," Marcus said, "I want to thank my sister for her patience. She's been under a lot of strain. Family business is hard on the sensitive ones." A few polite chuckles. The old move. "Make her small first." Vivian stood up. "I'd like to present instead," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She had learned this week that you don't have to. She put one document on the screen, then another. Property sales below market. Round-tripped payments. A supplier Marcus had bought through a shell and paid the company's own money to. The circles Daniel had traced, drawn now in clean black lines anyone could follow. The room went very quiet. "These aren't my findings," Vivian said. "They were compiled by an outside party and submitted this morning to the Securities and Exchange Commission. There's an inquiry open as of 9 a.m. She looked at her stepbrother. "You needed the lease to close because the lease was the last curtain, wasn't it, Marcus? Pull it back, and there's nothing behind it but the money you took." Marcus's smile finally failed. She's been manipulated. There's a handyman in Vermont feeding her. His name is Daniel Vance. Vivian let it land. "And you should be careful how you talk about him. Because there's one more document." The doors opened. Daniel walks in his flannel and his old boots, the steel case in his hand. He set it on the long table, turned the key, and laid the original patent agreement in front of the board, the real one, dated before Arthur Crane ever filed. This company, Daniel said, was built on a design that was mine. 50 years ago your founder took it. I could have brought that to you any day in those 50 years. I never did, because I had no quarrel with people who didn't know. His eyes moved to Marcus. I have a quarrel with theft I can see happening in front of me. The board members were no longer looking at Marcus like a leader. They were looking at him like a liability. It didn't take long after that. The vote to remove him as chief operating officer was unanimous. His own stepsister's hand raised with the rest. 2 men in plain suits, real badges this time, were waiting in the lobby when he came out. The fraud would run its course through the proper channels, the way these things do. Slowly. Completely. In the light. What no one in that boardroom expected was what Daniel did next. He did not claim the patent. He did not claim the company, or the 50 years, or a single dollar of the empire that had grown from his drawings. He had brought one more envelope, and inside it was a deed of assignment drawn up clean by a lawyer in Montpelier. He assigned the full rights to the patent and the settlement the company would owe for half a century of use, not to himself. To a trust, in the name of Nora Ellen Vance, age 7. She doesn't need a kingdom, Daniel told the board. She needs to never have to choose between fighting and feeding her family the way I did. That's all I ever wanted. That's done now. He picked up the empty steel case. The rest of your house is your business. I'd suggest you clean it. And then the man in faded flannel walked out of the most expensive room in Boston, got into an old Ford, and drove north to pick his daughter up from school. Spring came late to Calder's Mill that year, the way it always did. The flagship restaurant never opened. The company spent the next year being honest instead, which turned out to be slower and better. But the mill found a new life anyway. Daniel had bought back the time he'd spent worrying, and he spent it the way he liked, in the workshop, in the quiet, with sawdust in the light. One Saturday, an old Ford was not the only vehicle in the lot. Vivian came up the path in jeans and a flannel of her own, sleeves already rolled, her hair tied back. No coat worth a fortune. No cameras. She stood in the workshop doorway, and for once she didn't look like she owned anything. I don't know how to do any of this, she said. I looked it up. You start with the wrong grit and you ruin the wood. A breath. I was hoping someone might teach me. Daniel looked at her a long moment, the way he read grain. Most people quit the first day, he said. I'm competitive, Vivian said. I don't quit. The corner of his mouth moved. He handed her a block, knelt with her at the edge of the maple floor, and set his hand near hers on the wood to show her the motion, with the grain, never against it, slow. Their hands did not quite touch. Neither of them moved them away. The workshop door banged open. Nora came in trailing a drawing and a backpack, took in the scene with the frank attention of the very young, and decided it was fine. Are you helping? She asked Vivian. I'm trying to learn, Vivian said. Nora considered this. Then she crossed the room, dug a fresh sanding block out of her father's bin, and pressed it into Vivian's free hand with great seriousness. You'll need your own, she said. Daddy doesn't share his good one. And in the warm light of a 100-year-old floor that a powerful woman had once thrown water across without knowing whose it was, 3 people knelt down to work the grain. Slow, the way good things are made,